Hello and welcome to the next episode of what this podcast is, which I believe is a Reeves Ramblings. Yeah! So, I've moved out of the office, and I'm not entirely sure how the new setup's going to work and whatnot, so we will see. However, just going to turn my fan on real quick and hope it doesn't pick up too much on the microphone, but I'm very warm right now, so yeah. But today I will be talking about perspective, I suppose. I could probably talk about perspective for way longer than I'm going to, because it's a very broad topic, and I personally believe it's probably something that doesn't get addressed enough in life. But oh well. So to start off with my discussion of perspective, I'm going to mention that in my perspective right now, I'm an idiot because I should have got a drink before starting this, but oh well. And moving past that, I would like to mention why I think perspective is so important, why it's something that I think is undermentioned within our society and just in general, I suppose. See, perspective is theoretically the root of all conflict. The fact that people have differing perspectives on things is likely why people argue and fight about things. The good example of this would probably be... well, none come to my mind off the top of my head. Screw it. Let's go with World War II. Why not? There's obviously this perspective of the Nazi Party, that they were right, and then there's this perspective of pretty much everyone else, that they're absolute, if you'll excuse the term, dickheads. So, yeah. But more than that is, everyone has their own unique perspective, and nobody else can see those. Yes, it's entirely possible that we can, but we can't prove that we can. If two people look at something, say that thing is in a controlled environment, and they look from the exact same location, is their perspective the same? Probably, but we can't say for sure. And so these are things that are vital questions, in my opinion. It's very philosophical, this episode. But perspective doesn't get put into perspective. For example, that instance of two people looking at the same thing from the same place in a controlled environment. While the environment that the thing is in may be controlled, unless those people's environments were strictly controlled, would they not have had past experiences which are different, and thus likely evoke different emotions from them and whatnot? For example, if one of them was a lumberjack's child, and the thing they were looking at was an axe, they would probably be like, oh, that reminds me of, my family. Whereas if the other one's family was horrifically murdered by someone with an axe, they would probably be, at the very least, not happy to see an axe, unless they really, really didn't like their family. So there's multiple layers to perspective, I suppose is the easiest way to put it, and I think that nobody pays attention enough to that. Yes, there's a lot of people who say things like, you don't know me, you know my name, or stuff like that. Things which effectively boil down to, I am more than you know, so don't judge me. There are things in my life that you aren't aware of, which is why everyone says you don't know what people are going through, so be nice to them. It's a nice message, and it makes a lot of sense, though it, isn't always applicable, and that's because perspective, again, if you were to put into perspective all of the sufferings that people go through. For example, me, I would argue that the most difficult thing that I can, in living memory, have had to do is let go of people. Not physically, obviously, but yeah. I also am aware that many people think that's absolute nonsense, that is the hardest thing anyone's had to do, and I say unto those people, well, putting it against your own perspective probably is. Like, you've probably had harder things than letting go of people to you, but letting go of people to me is way harder than you seem to give me credit for. And then if you put other things into perspective, like a lot of people claim that it's incredibly difficult to get by these days due to the minimum wage being so low and the living costs being so high. And what's the point in getting by if you just survive? The point of society is to allow our species to thrive. However, I've been saying however a lot. Oh well. If you put that into context, while yes, there are people doing better off nearby, there are still severely impoverished areas that don't have clean water. That's a much harder challenge to survive that. So, there's perspective in all things, and I would argue that due to that, the higher your highs are, the lower your lows feel. If you were to take someone from a wonderful life of luxury and drop them into a terrible life of depravity, they would almost certainly see that as the worst thing they've had to deal with. I don't doubt that if that would happen to me, not that I've lived a particularly luxurious life, not if I live a really sheltered one, but yeah, I would probably argue that might be worse than letting go of someone. But I have had a few particularly terrible things occur to me during my life. I'm not going to go into great detail, but there's been a great deal of family problems, quite a few health issues, and generally mental health problems have been particularly present, and to an extent still are, and most of it's gone unresolved, which doesn't really help. But yeah, I still find the hardest part is letting go of people. Yes, letting go of things is difficult for me as well. I am apparently just terrible at letting go in the non-physical sense. I can actually drop things incredibly easily physically. I tend to do it a lot when I don't intend to, but oh well. I think that everyone's perspective is shaped by their experiences, and if souls exist, that as well. I won't say they do, I won't say they won't. I like to believe that they do, but that belief is not exactly unshakable. I question it almost constantly whenever the idea comes up, because it doesn't make the most sense. But hey, whatever. So, yeah, the differences in what people claim to be difficult experiences are differences that can be thought of and... Oh, I'm going to take my headphones off. I don't need to have them on, to be honest, because I can't hear anything through them at the moment. I just put them on to do a test thing, but they would make my ears really hot, which probably didn't help. Hopefully you can't hear the fan. But yeah. So, continuing to talk about perspective in a different way, even though I know I just stopped in the middle of a train of thought to go on a tangent there, and I can't remember where I was, so hence why I'm going to a different piece of perspective, is the perspective from author to reader. From the perspective of the author, everything they write, at least with me, I don't know if this is true for other people because it's my private perspective, yeah, everything they write is, whenever they would read it, is written and they get their intention. However, a reader can get a different message from it. This is particularly the case with English literature studying Oh, I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry about that. I did move away from the microphone in order to sneeze, but I'm not entirely sure if it helped much. But yes, during English literature A-level, because I did an English literature A-level, we had poetry analysis. We had a land poetry anthology, and we had to analyse it and extract meaning and all that sort of stuff. I'm pretty sure that for some of it, the meanings were not intended by the authors at all, especially not all the meanings that were drawn from it, which is one of the interesting things about language, to be honest, that you can draw meaning that was not intended. It's not particularly exact science, is language, which is, I think, a good thing. But maybe that's a topic for another episode of Reeve's Ramblings. I don't know, we'll see. However, I can almost certainly say that a reader is going to interpret something that's been written differently than the writer does. This is probably less the case with non-fiction work that is not, like, rhetoric heavy. So, example being a science textbook, or maths, I suppose, even though maths is kind of a science as far as I'm aware, because it, to an extent, uses the scientific method, but not really. Anyway, if it says, this atom has this many things, that's not really something that's hard to interpret, that just means what it says. Whereas, there are entire things, usually like long story-like pieces of poetry, or long poetry-like, short poetry-like stories that are incredibly symbolic and stuff, which need some level of personal interpretation, and everyone's individual perspective on that can come out incredibly different, which is fascinating and kind of terrifying. Can't say why, really, but it is to me. Whatever, though. Then, on top of that, I'm going to stick with my A-levels here. Creative writing. Yes, I'm sticking with writing as well, though not in the same manner. I got a warning in my creative writing A-levels. I think I got 10 points deducted from me on the exam due to the fact that I wrote some, let's say, 18 plus material in the exam, and from my perspective that was fine. However, that's because my perspective was not a perspective which could see the fact that you're not meant to do that. Why couldn't I see that? Because that information was never put into my perspective. Yes, apparently there's a whole warning thing saying, oh, you can't do these things in your exam, but nobody ever told me, which is kind of unfair, because, if you don't know you can't do it, then you really should be able to do it, and that's got me curious for A-levels. I'm going to bring it up probably at some point. If I have to write any pieces, then I'm going to ask, can they be X-rated, technically, I suppose, because that's what I did. I haven't written anything like that in a long time, like 2 years, but actually no, year and a half, roughly. But yeah, it's what I did in that exam, so if I feel like writing that on the day, I want to see whether I'll be allowed to, or whether I'll get told off. I feel like I shouldn't get told off, given that, I am now 20 and nearly 21, especially if there's an exam in it, then I'll be like a month away from being 21. I'm pretty sure that they shouldn't be like, oh, no, you're only allowed to say one swear word, and it can only be a low-grade swear word, like shit. And yes, if you use more than that, then we are going to deduct 1 grade per thing. So good luck with that. It's like, you can't tackle these topics because they might offend us. No, it's fiction. That's the whole point of creative writing. Duh. Or I suppose, creative writing could be writing creatively in a way that people would enjoy non-fiction. Though, I suppose that would be sort of like... Oh no, they're not called anagrams. The things where you narrow it down. So like CEO instead of whatever that actually stands for. Or I suppose... UK instead of United Kingdom. That. They do that for stuff like the planets and whatnot. Or making songs out of stuff. Which is a thing for some reason. Yeah. Where was I going with this? I don't know. But yeah, that is the majority of what I had planned in my head, like in the half a minute or so before recording this, that I had to talk about as far as perspective goes. So, as far as I'm concerned, I've finished, but I've got a time slot to fill between 20 and 30 minutes. That's something that I've told myself, so there's like a whole 4 minutes left, at least, for me to talk, which means I'm going to go on about perspective some more. Perspective zoom's a feature of cameras that I'm not entirely sure of what it does, but something. And also, perspectives can change. And you can be aware of perspectives that aren't your own. You can't know them, you can't understand them, but you can be aware of them and act appropriately. For example, I'm aware that some people's perspectives are sensitive. Well, the people are sensitive, and therefore their perspectives are particularly narrow, with bits that are purposefully blocked out because otherwise they are either offended or whatever. I'm not going to mention any specifics here that I know of in real life, but here's a made-up one. If someone found talking about wasps incredibly offensive because they think they were a wasp in a past life, and they feel as though it's disrespectful to talk about their past life with them, I would probably avoid the topic of wasps unless I could bring up, their past life and get them to talk about it first, because I wouldn't want to offend them. And then there's also the bigger picture sort of perspective, where if you are in a situation, I'm just gonna use, I don't know, if you live with people, right, you don't want to do anything to upset those people, due to the fact that you live with them and it will not be good for you in the long run, so you don't upset them. You have to look at the larger perspective, rather than just focusing on your own. Because back when I lived at my mum's, I got in trouble with my brother for not moving the plate from the table to the work surface. It's like a 2-meter movement, and I very rarely did it. Sometimes I did it, but not always. And apparently that really, really annoyed him, so I tried to do it after he mentioned that to me. Yes, he mentioned it in an incredibly unpolite and, well, downright rude manner, but because I didn't want to upset him consistently, even though he did that with me, some people just aren't as considerate. Hey, brother. But, oh well, yeah, I didn't want to upset him. I spent a lot of time in the same building as him. He could make my life incredibly difficult if he wanted to. Same thing now. If I were to upset anyone in this here house of which I'm recording this, they could stop paying bills, because the bills are coming out of my account at the moment. So, that'd be bad. Same thing with the rent. So, yes, I feel as though it would be a terrible, terrible idea, for the most part. But, yes, this has been my talking about perspective. There are big perspectives, there are different perspectives. Everyone has a unique one, and I think everyone should be aware of that. some people have difficult things, and that's their perspective, whereas other people would find those things easy and other things difficult. But that's their perspective. Everything is subjective. It's all about the subjective perspective. Perhaps I should do a show called Subjective Perspective, where I just talk about my ideas, like, that are unpopular, I suppose. The sort of things that I think that very few people will share. Maybe I will. I'm going to write that down, actually. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to knock the mic there. But subjective perspective series? Question mark? Cool. Right, well, I'm gonna go. This one's relatively short, but hey, it's the first one back at the house, so I hope it turns out alright. Let me know in the comments below. Even if you know me in person, please comment so it gets in the YouTube algorithm, because I think it will help. And I will catch you cats on the flip-flop. Goodbye.